Good evening, welcome to the National Library of Scotland. It's really great to see all of you here this evening, and also welcome to our online audience who are tuning in too. My name is Amina Shah. I'm the National Librarian and the Chief Executive of the National Library of Scotland, and I'm absolutely thrilled to have Mollie Hughes with us this evening, adventurer extraordinaire and inspiration to talk about her new book, Blue Scotland, that you can see behind us. So Mollie has actually been involved in the library before because you helped us open our Petticoats and Pinnacles exhibition, didn't you?
I was like in the depths of lockdown 1 or 2 or 3, I'm not sure. Maybe, was it November 21, I think? And that was an amazing exhibition, all about the history of female mountaineers, mostly in Scotland.
Yes.
It was great, and I saw it online, helped you guys open it, and then when the world opened up, I came and looked around it, and I brought my mum and my sister, and it was really, really cool.
Yeah, and it was all these untold stories in our archives of women who'd been explorers in the past, but of course you are very much an explorer of today, aren't you? And you've been...
Well, I think when I saw that exhibition, how lucky I felt that I could actually do what I do and enjoy going to the mountains freely. I could especially wear trousers when I go out there, which is even better.
Yeah, exactly. The materials are a little bit better, aren't they? There's no heels. Yep. No. And so you wrote. Some people might not know that, as well as being an author and writing Blue Scotland, you've also done amazing expeditions yourself. Do you want to tell us a little bit about how you got into that?
The Blue Scotland thing has been a little bit of a curveball for some people, because I think people associate me with climbing mountains in the Himalayas or polar trips in Antarctica. So when I started talking about paddleboarding and surfing, I think a few people were like, what's she talking about? Why is she not talking about mountains? But this is really where it all began. In 2012 on the south side of Mount Everest. I was 21 years old. I just finished university at UE in Bristol, where your son goes, we just found out. And in my final year at uni, I was studying sports psychology. And I'm kind of a bit dyslexic, so the idea for me of sitting down and writing like a 10,000 word project at the age of 20 was quite scary. So I thought, I need to write about something super interesting for me to commit to this, to stop going out with my friends and sit down and write 10,000 words. And I'd had an interest in mountaineering for maybe the last 4 or 5 years. I travelled a bit around the world, climbing mountains. I've seen the Himalayas and climbed there in India. I've been to South America and lots in Africa and the Alps. So I thought, what's one of the biggest kind of psychological challenges in mountaineering? And Mount Everest sprung to mind. It's the highest mountain in the world, the most famous mountain in the world. And the psychology of anyone that thinks about climbing it or wants to climb it, I thought must be really interesting. And it was. I found 7 guys around the country who'd all climbed it. Couldn't find any woman at the time to interview, unfortunately, but I found these 7 guys who were amazing. They were lovely, lovely guys. And I travelled and I sat down and talked to them about how they controlled fear on the mountain when they were crossing those crevasses, how they looked up at the mountain and didn't get overwhelmed with the kind of psychological pressure that you face because you've put so much into getting to base camp in terms of sponsorship or potentially spending your own money, years of training, telling everyone that you're going to climb Everest. That psychological pressure is huge when you're sat at base camp. So I talked to these guys all about these different things. I wrote the project, 10,000 words, but I think I knew maybe halfway through the first interview that I wanted to maybe see it with my own eyes, and I didn't want to just talk to these guys about their experiences. So that's when I started planning and plotting this first trip.
Wow. So how long was it since you finished your dissertation to actually getting up there on the mountain?
Not very long, actually. So it was about 12 months. So I guess I handed the dissertation in May 2011, and I was there April 2012.
And how did you do it? What did you need to do to prepare for that?
I guess 3 main things. One was to get super fitter than I'd been in my whole life. So I went down to the gym at uni and I found one of the coaches there and I was like, help me. I was part of the netball team, so I did a lot of sport, but I was mainly in that for the kind of Wednesday night socials, which were always fun. So started to get as fit as I could be. The second was to increase my mountaineering experience. Mm-hmm. So I'd climbed a bit around the world, but I knew if I wanted to take this on, I had to do much more. So I planned a summer in the Alps, in the French Alps, and then in the autumn I was on a big expedition in the Himalayas on a mountain called Amadablam, quite close to Everest. And the third and the hardest thing was to raise all the money. Everest is a super expensive mountain to climb, maybe the most expensive, second most expensive. Anywhere between 30 and, I don't know, these days you could probably pay 80,000 maybe to climb it.
Wow.
And I was 20 years old, poor university student, so I had to go about looking for sponsorship, trying to convince companies to give me that funding in return for whatever I thought I could offer them, which was marketing opportunities. I didn't really know what I was doing when I was 21, but I kind of said I would come and do talks with them afterwards. I would put their logos all over my suit and everything. And that was hard. That was the hardest bit, was raising the funds.
But it worked.
But it worked.
Managed to do it.
I managed to get there just April 2021. Fresh-faced and still pretty young, headed off to the south side.
And so in this picture here, are you walking across, like,
yeah. So that
I don't know the expression, a big vacant space between two mountains? Is that what you're doing there?
That is in the place called the Khumbu Icefall, and that's kind of the first stage of climbing Everest on the south side of the mountain. And it's also probably, I would say, the most dangerous stage for both the north route and the south route.
Yeah.
And this crevasse is basically where the Khumbu Glacier has come down, and the floor has got really steep, which means the whole of the glacier kind of breaks apart and opens up in different places. It's also continuously moving. The Khumbu Icefall moves up to about a metre a day. So these crevasses get smaller, and scarily they get a little bit bigger every day as well.
Wow.
And I think between base camp and camp 1, we counted maybe 27 or 28 of those crevasses to cross when we were there on the south side.
My goodness. And did you find yourself using some of the skills that you learned from interviewing the people who'd been before? About how did you manage your mind in that scenario?
I think so. So interestingly, I interviewed 7 guys, and they all had very different psychological experiences. Some it had been like a childhood ambition. They'd always wanted to do it, so everything was kind of riding on it. Some of them, a couple of the guys were serving in the military, and one of their friends had died in combat, and it was always his ambition, so they took on that ambition. So there's loads of push for them. Some of them just went with friends. But I think probably the biggest thing I took from talking to different people was that you have to be just so pragmatic about everything. You don't ever want to think about the top. You just want to think about that next step. If it is getting to camp 1 that day, if it's even like pushing forward like another 100 meters or something, really bringing everything down to like the now and the present. I think is what I probably learned or took away from most of it.
Wow. And do you find, does that help with other things other than mountain climbing, just in life generally? Or is that sort of, did it change you?
Yeah. I mean, I think in that respect, a little bit. I think when you're in a situation like that, it is all very situational, and you've got to deal with what's in front of you right then. And then when you're at home, it's such a different environment. There's different challenges, different stresses. But it definitely changed me. Like when I was a teenager, when I was at uni, I was super shy. I was always like the shyest kid in the class. Super introvert, would never put my hand up and answer a question. So never had that much kind of self-confidence. But I think going and succeeding on the south side of Everest definitely made me believe in myself a bit more. Maybe not confidence, but it gave me a bit more maybe self-belief.
Mm-hmm. Wow, if that can give you confidence, I don't know, I can't even imagine. Yeah. But then you got the bug, didn't you? Because you didn't stop there.
Yeah, so I got back from Everest maybe beginning of June 2012. Probably didn't really want to see another mountain again for a little while. But then maybe after 6 months, going on 12 months, I couldn't really get the north side of the mountain out of my head. And the north side is on the Tibetan side of the mountain. It's thought to be colder, windier, and you spend more time above 8,000 meters in what's known as the death zone. Half the guys I'd interviewed climbed the north side, and half climbed the south side. So I kind of almost felt like I'd only really experienced half of this mountain. Wow. And the north side's amazing. It's steeped in history. It's where those kind of first British teams were trying to climb in the 1920s. Stories of Mallory and Irvine getting close to the top. Nobody really knows if they got up there or not.
In their tweets.
Exactly. So it always kind of held a bit of an allure over me. It took a long time to get back there in terms of raising the funds again, training. But beginning of April 2017, returned to the mountain on the north side with this little team. There was 4 of us, myself, my guide from the UK, John Gupta, and our 2 Nepalese guys, Leela and Lakpa. And it was amazing. The north side was incredible.
Wow. And how is it different? What's the different challenge around the north side?
It feels like a different mountain altogether. I guess one of the biggest psychological challenges when you're sat at base camp on the north side, the mountain is just kind of there. So you can see in this bottom photo, it's just there in front of you. Whereas on the south side, it's hidden around a corner, so you don't really see the full extent of what you've got to do until like you're almost there on the south side. But on the north side, it's just there, and you see everything that's going on when you're sat in your tent. You unzip it in the morning, and it's in front of you. You come out the toilet tent, and it's there in front of you. It's always like looming above you, and you see the kind of clouds coming in for maybe a day or two, and then the clouds move away, and it's covered in snow because it's been snowing up there. You see the spindrift in the snow just blowing off the top. Sometimes it looks like the mountain is smoking because the wind is just whipping the snow off the top. It's kind of terrifying being sat down and looking up there and thinking, how on earth am I going to get up there?
Wow. and when you say that you had your small team with you, did you see other people on the mountain as well?
Yeah.
Were there other people doing things?
So I guess, everyone knows and has seen the press in recent years about Mount Everest. And most of the kind of crowding and overcrowding has happened on the Nepalese side, on the south side. And when I was there in 2012, that was kind of the first year that the crowding started to happen.
Right.
And that's probably one of the reasons I also wanted to try the north side, because I'd been so obsessed with this mountain for so long. And when I got there, don't get me wrong, it was incredible and we had an amazing trip, but it was busy and there were a lot of people around.
Right.
And with that busyness, it does compromise safety in lots of different aspects. So I wanted to try the north side because it is quieter, maybe a third less climbers on the north side. It's bigger, it's more open, more space, it absorbs people a little bit better. And it was incredible. I think maybe on the south side we summited, and on that day, maybe I might be making this up, but maybe around 200 people summited that same day. On the north side, there was just us, the four of us, and this Russian team around, so there's maybe 8 of them and 4 of us, so much, much smaller.
Wow.
And incredible.
Yeah. But you even go further, don't you, with more loneliness and isolation, which is really something else in your Antarctica expedition. Which when I heard about this at first, I don't know if any of you are explorers in the audience, but I'm not in that category. The idea of being on my own in a snow-filled environment for 58 days, you could scream into the wilderness and there's nobody there. It seems completely alien to me, beyond my imagination. But you did, that just whet your appetite. Going up the north side whet your appetite for doing something even more, didn't it?
I think when I need to get a little bit obsessed with somewhere to make me want to go there enough. And Antarctica is such an incredible place. It's this vast frozen continent. It's the world's biggest desert. A friend of mine who's actually in the audience today, Damon, we used to live together when I first moved to Edinburgh, and he did some work with the British Antarctic Survey. So he spent a couple of field seasons down in Antarctica and would come back to our flat next to the meadows and show us all these amazing photos and videos, and I was like, oh my God, I want to go there. But Damon's a scientist and I'm not, and I had no usable skills for the British Antarctic Survey. they employ plumbers and doctors, and you can do anything with them, but nothing that I could offer them. So I thought, okay, how am I going to get down there? How am I going to see this place? What I can do is suffer, and I can suffer for a long time.
Proven that to yourself.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you do that. You're good at that.
So I thought that might be a way in. And I started looking up different expeditions. And I think with all these big expeditions, the hardest thing is always raising the money.
Yeah.
So you need some kind of unique selling point to convince people to give you that money in order to go. So I was looking at different expeditions, and I think I realised that if I skied from somewhere called Hercules Inlet, which is on the edge of the continent, is where the sea ice meets the land mass of the continent. And if I skied from there to the South Pole, 700 miles, and if I did it on my own, I'd be the youngest woman to do it in 2020, at the age of 29 at the time. Wow. So I found a unique selling point, and then I could use that to try and raise the 70-odd thousand pounds I needed to take on this expedition.
And did you do a lot of fundraising yourself, or did you have someone help you do that?
Yeah, I mean, I have lots of people around me that have helped me over the years. When I started off when I was 21, it was my dad helping me write my sponsorship proposals and giving me ideas. I've got an amazing PR agent called Debbie who helps me now and is always there as a sounding board. But yeah, there's a lot of sending proposals into different companies, and a lot of rejection, a lot of not hearing back from people. It's sometimes getting into the boardroom and trying to put your case to them, like, oh, can I have 50 grand to do this, and you just see their kind of blank faces in front of you. Yeah, really, really hard.
Wow,
for sure.
That's an experience in itself, just raising all that money and going out and being brave about that as well.
And I think because you still have to plan everything at the same time. I think in the early stages, I think somebody once told me that the sponsorship often comes through right at the last minute. So you have to do everything. You have to train every day. You have to plan your expedition. You have to plan your route. You have to work out your team. So everything has to happen in conjunction with you not actually having the money.
Yes.
And that happened with every trip. It was weeks before, maybe a month or 2 months before, until it finally came through.
What you mean, just before you left, that close to you, you got your bags packed, you're sort of ready, fit and ready.
You don't know if you're going or not.
Wow, and who did give you the money then? Who were the main sponsors?
So before Antarctica, I had Gore-Tex, who were awesome. We designed this little Gore-Tex outfit. It was like a new fabric that they were using, so we designed this outfit, and they gave me some cash. I had a boiler company called A-Tag Heating, who were based in Dunfermline, who came in right at the last minute, absolutely saved the day, which was awesome.
That's amazing.
And a private donor, this amazing lady who supported and got on board with the expeditions as well.
Wow. That's incredible. So this was your outfit, and how did you get there?
So to get to Antarctica, I flew from Edinburgh to Chile, and in Chile down to Punta Arenas down in the bottom, and then from there you can get on a flight to Antarctica. There's a company that run the logistics behind these expeditions called Antarctic Logistics and Expeditions. So they got me on a plane to Antarctica. Then there's a big base camp right next to the coast, where you kind of sit, prepare, wait for your expedition. And then I got flown in a very small plane from there, maybe 30 minutes, 40 minutes to my start point at Hercules Inlet. And then the pilots helped me pull my sled off the plane, which was hard. It weighed maybe 105 kilograms at the beginning of the trip. And then they took off, and I saw them flying over the horizon, and that was it.
How did that feel?
I mean, quite exciting, actually. Like, the first couple of hours of this expedition went really well. Maybe the best couple of hours of the whole 58 days, unfortunately, because this was literally when I was taking off. The sun was shining. It was quite flat because I was still on the sea ice before I hit the continent for the first couple of hours. The sled was moving well behind me. Skied on for a couple of hours, waved the guys off, and then I hit the first hill. And the whole way to the South Pole is unfortunately uphill because you start close to sea level. The South Pole is at 2,800 meters above sea level. So it's one of those really slow, gradual hills for 2 months. And as I came in and hit that hill, the wind picked up. And in Antarctica, the wind comes from the centre outwards. I don't really know how or why. David will probably know. But it comes from the centre. So it's always a headwind when you're heading into the middle of the continent. And also when I hit the hill and the wind started, these big clouds came over the horizon behind me. And they stuck on me for 8 days. So I had the first 8 days of this trip were complete whiteout. So left is the same as right, up's the same as down. The winds, it was a bit of a weather front that came in. The winds got up to about 65 knots, gusting. And with that, temperatures dropped to about minus 45 with wind chill.
Minus 45.
yeah, with wind chill, which is still very cold.
And you're pulling.
And the snow was soft and horrible, so you'd hit big patches of snow that you didn't see because you're in the whiteout, and try and pull it out for 5 or 10 minutes. The first 8 days of this trip were hell. It started badly.
Did you think, I'm just going to phone? Because I guess you can't just do that, can you? Just pick me up.
So there's amazing support from the logistics company, and each night when I stopped skiing at 8 p.m, I'd ring them and give them my coordinates and let them know I'm okay. And if I was desperate, they could come and get me. But when the weather's that bad, when it's that windy and you can't see anything, they wouldn't be able to fly the planes in. So it felt pretty lonely the first 8 days for sure.
Wow. And how did you withstand that weather then? How did you keep going?
Yeah, I got very behind schedule. So my kind of plan for the trip, 700 miles, it was 600 nautical miles. I wanted to be doing about 12.5 nautical miles a day to get me there in good time. Those first few days I was doing like 3 nautical miles, 4, 5 if I was lucky, back to 2 when the weather was really bad, because it was just impossible skiing into that wind. So super behind schedule. But I always knew I wanted to make a bit of progress. I knew the storm would pass at some point, but if I could just make a little bit of progress, I think mainly psychologically, I would feel a bit better.
And what were you doing when you weren't walking then? You've got a tent. Were you able to keep warm enough in there?
Yeah, so when I got into the swing of it, I would ski for 10 or 11 hours a day. And then I'd pitch the tent, which took a long time, especially when it was really windy. I'd then spend 2 or 3 hours melting snow and ice for drinking water, rehydrating myself, cooking food, sorting any kit that I needed to fix that day, and then finally sleeping. Then I would wake up the next morning at 6, spend the first 2 hours melting snow and ice, preparing for the day. And I'd always try and be on my skis at 8 a.m. and then ski for another 10 or 11 hours. So being quite regimented with all of that. So there wasn't much downtime or chilling out time. When it was sunny, so when I wasn't in a whiteout, the tent was really warm because it's 24-hour daylight down there. So I'd pitch the tent, the sun would be high in the sky, and it would come through and it would be quite warm inside the tent. But when the whiteout was there for the first 8 days, there was no warmth, just suffering.
So it's 24-hour daylight. Yeah. So how did you, I take it, you had a watch, you had a phone then to get logistics. How did you charge up the batteries?
With solar panels, which is the great thing about Antarctica. When the sun is out, it's always there. And I didn't even, because it's so good, I didn't even charge them in the day. When I slept at night, I would put my solar panel between the outer and the inner of my tent and charge my batteries as I slept.
Amazing.
Yeah.
These practicalities.
Yeah. It wasn't as hard to get used to as I thought. The sun just did like a big loop around my head over 24 hours. It helped a bit with navigation sometimes. And it was cool. I had an eye mask to sleep and earplugs from the wind.
But it had some respite. And so you reached there, was it January 21?
10th of January 2020.
2020, and got into the Guinness Book of Records, is that right?
Yeah. So I was the youngest woman at the age of 29 to ski solo from the coast to the pole. Yeah.
Incredible. And did it feel different to doing the mountain expeditions? Was it very different, and did you feel different afterwards?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, with mountaineering, there's always a team around you, especially on these big trips. I always had a guide, Sherpa guides, always people that could make the final decision, which was it was great. Like, I absolutely needed them, especially when I was younger. But it always felt like there was somebody there that I could defer to. And I always wondered if I could do something like this and I could take on all those decisions myself, and if I could motivate myself enough. And starting this trip in Antarctica, I didn't really know if I could. But finally getting to the pole after 58 days, it did feel good. I felt more proud of this trip than any of the others, I think.
Did you feel like you could do anything after doing that? Like, I think if I achieved half an hour in that environment, I would be giving myself a lot of credit. But, it must have felt incredible that you've managed to be that resilient and overcome difficulties and self-sufficient.
Yeah, no, it did feel good. And I think, the other trips I have never felt that kind of sense of pride, really. But this one I did. I think because it was all on my shoulders and I had to cheer myself up when I felt down. I had to make really hard decisions some days on what I should do, how I should work with the conditions I had. I did feel really proud of this one. But again, it's all circumstantial. In Antarctica, I can be super resilient and I can get through whiteouts, but different challenges come in different ways. Back home,
Wow. I just still find it absolutely amazing to contemplate. And these photographs are incredible. So these were all taken by somebody else, when you first arrived, is it?
So that one is a self-timer.
Right.
That one is a self-timer. And then that was a chap at the South Pole. That was one of the pilots. Yeah, taking video photography was really hard on your own. You basically ski along, set your camera up, ski back, but try and make it not look like your track's in it, and then ski towards the camera or ski past it and come back for it. Yeah.
So you said that was like January 2020, and then February. We all started to sort of get an idea of what's happening in the world with COVID and the pandemic, and then we were right into a different sort of world. So that must have felt really strange. You've been on your own, right across the world, and then what happened to you afterwards?
I had maybe almost 2 months, maybe 6 weeks of freedom, where things felt pretty normal getting home. Had my first bath and shower in 60 odd days, ate loads of food, saw lots of friends. It was great for a bit, but then this kind of like air of whatever was coming was there. So by March 2020, back in social isolation, and instead of being on my own in this big space, I was in my little flat in Edinburgh. And it was weird, and it was hard, but I didn't want to say it was hard because many other people had much harder situations in lockdown than I did. But I think for me, it made me realise how much I need big open spaces around me, and when you are stuck inside, is not where I thrive. I need to be outside for sure.
I can imagine the 1 walk a day rule, and it must have really been hard for you at that point.
We live right in the middle of Edinburgh, so we go for walks like around Inverleith Park. I remember one sunny day we just like sat down just for we probably sat down for about 35 seconds, and then these 2 police officers came and they're like, "You're not allowed to sit down." We're like, "What?" So just had to get up and walk.
It's sometimes hard to remember those times and what happened really, but it must have been really such a contrast for you, and then that kind of prompted you into looking at your surroundings in Scotland, didn't it, to the start of the book?
Definitely. I guess kind of I'd always, with my trips, taken myself away far from the shores of Scotland and the UK. But with lockdown being here, it made me just focus in on what I've actually got around me and how incredible it is. Like before, I hope I didn't take it for granted. I'm from Devon originally, but I've lived in Scotland for 9, almost 10 years. And use it as my playground, I use it as a training ground, but maybe I took it for granted a little bit. When I was in lockdown, just surrounded by these amazing, amazing spaces, I knew that this is what I wanted to do, and I wanted to go off and explore more of Scotland. And also, I guess, the idea of how much we need the outdoors for our mental health, and that's when I kind of first came across the concept of blue health. And when I came across this concept, it's basically this concept of how important blue spaces are for our general well-being. So it's lochs, it's the coast, it's canals, it's riverways, any body of water, and how important it was. There's loads more studies these days coming out showing that blue spaces are even more important to us than green spaces. I think deep down I always knew it. Like I grew up next to the beach in Devon, and I always, whenever there was a time of stress or anxiety, I'd feel myself going to the beach, being drawn to it, and you feel like happier and stilled by the ocean. But then when I started reading about the concept of blue health, and it's actually a thing, and people are studying it and people are prescribing it to people, I was like, okay, this all absolutely makes sense.
It's fascinating because when I read your book and you mentioned blue health, I hadn't actually heard of it, but as soon as I heard about it, I recognised it. You know, that calming feeling, or just the sense of that the waves continue and the tide goes in and out, and all that happens, and regardless of what's happening in your life, and you know, and you can see the beauty of it. But there had been a lot of talk in lockdown about people connecting more with nature, and suddenly, because we'd slowed down, being able to sort of appreciate our surroundings and understand things a little bit more. And there's a term, isn't there? Is it nature bath? That the idea that taking a walk or whatever would be good for your health. So what's different about blue health then than just sort of general nature? Yes.
Well, like recent studies are showing that it is more beneficial for well-being, for combating stress, for also increasing our physical activity levels, which really helps, which links into this book. I know that being near blue spaces, going for a walk along a beach or along a cliff top is really great for us, but I think being on the water or in the water is even better for us. It washes away everything and connects you with something that's so much bigger.
Yeah, wow. So did you immediately sort of start thinking about the idea for this book and researching during lockdown?
Started during lockdown, and when I came up with the idea of the book, I managed to get this great Edinburgh publishers on board called Berlin, who got behind the book. I then thought, okay, if I'm writing a book about Scotland, it needs to look great, and the photography needs to look amazing. And I called up my friend Rachel Keenan, who's this great, amazing photographer based out of Glasgow, and I said, do you want to do this book with me? And she just said yes straight away. So all these incredible photos are from Rachel. And we started putting together a massive spreadsheet of everywhere we wanted to go in Scotland, or places we'd been that we thought could be good. The whole spreadsheet was maybe like 150 different places. And as we started on the journey, we started kind of whittling it down slightly, and we came up in the end with 65 different locations, from the North Coast, East Coast, West Coast, all of the islands. into the middle of Scotland, everywhere we could get to in the amount of time we had.
And so it's amazing what you've done in the book as well, because it's really, I guess it's also a guide to how to do it, how to keep yourself safe, how you can do it in a sustainable way, how you can use public transport. And so you've also, as well as the areas, you've got kind of tips that people should consider. What would you say are the sort of main things people should take account of?
Like the book basically focuses on paddleboarding, wild swimming, surfing and kayaking. But any time you go on an adventure in Scotland is so much more than that. You're not just going to go surfing for a few hours on the beach. You're going there and you're kind of immersed in this environment. You're immersed in the community that you're in, especially when you get to the more remote areas of Scotland, which was great. Like, we've seen so many different areas of Scotland, and each one's different. Some are easy to get to. So I wanted a few locations around kind of big popular areas like Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen, so people could easily find these blue spaces. Then also the ones that take a little bit more adventuring, heading off to the far northwest, heading off to the islands, that people need to put on their bucket list because they need to be done at some point in everyone's life, I think.
And you make that point, don't you, that the way that we are, the way that the landscape is in Scotland, that wherever we are, we're not far from water in some way.
Yeah. I probably put all the facts in there of how much coastline and how many lochs there are, but there's a lot of water in Scotland, and not just the stuff that falls from the sky. There's a lot of it.
And in fact, there's none falling from the sky in any of your pictures. It's all very sunny.
Kenny was asking about that earlier, and literally we were shooting mostly between maybe April 21 and October 21, and every time we got the camera out, the sun came out. It was really weird, really weird.
I know, they're absolutely stunning, and not only with the sun, but the colours of the water is really incredible as well. Yeah. So, in terms of just let people absorb some of these amazing pictures here. They're so beautiful. And in terms of the people that were with you, your dog was with you as well. Yeah.
So it was a big journey, and we were both working full time as well. So whenever we kind of used every weekend, every holiday we could to meet up somewhere in Scotland and go and do these journeys. My girlfriend came on a lot of them with me, Rachel's partner Owen, my dog, who we got partway through the journey, so she features in the book quite a lot. She starts off like as a tiny puppy and then kind of grows over the 6 months or so. Yeah,
because she grew up so much in that time. Very cute.
So yeah, we had a good team, and then various places we went, we would meet locals or that saw what we're doing on Instagram, and they'd come paddleboarding or swimming with us, or we'd meet up with friends for different journeys. If they lived in a certain area and they knew some great locations for us. So yeah, a lot of the time we'd bring in other people, and also a lot of the time it was me and Rachel on like a Friday night jumping on the M8 and driving somewhere to a location around Scotland to shoot that weekend.
Amazing. And there is just so much variety in it. So surprisingly, one of the things you did was go down the Clyde, and which isn't what you imagine when you think about getting away from it all or taking advantage of the water. People might not think about the Clyde. So what was it like?
So this was the first one that we did. So it was it must have been like April 21, and it was when you were just slowly starting to be able to like leave home, or maybe that 5 mile radius was just opening up slightly. So we travelled from Edinburgh to Glasgow, met Rachel in Glasgow, and it was April, so it was absolutely freezing still. It was maybe like -1 in the car park. We parked at the Transport Museum, pumping up our boards in the freezing cold before sunrise. There's a little slipway down there where you can get onto the Clyde, and onto the Clyde for sunrise. It was completely still, there was no wind. As the kind of water would flow over the front of your paddleboard, it would freeze, so it turned to ice on the front of your paddleboard. Did not want to fall in that day, not only because the Clyde looks a bit dirty, but also how cold it was. And we paddled up through the city, saw incredible sights. It was such a different perspective on Glasgow. You'd see the BBC buildings, the STV buildings, the armadillo, the huge crane. Yeah, it was really, really cool.
Did you get any Glasgow banter on the way? You could just imagine people, all right, hen, what are you doing?
Luckily it was super early on, maybe a Sunday morning, so there was nobody about.
It's not what people might expect to see.
We saw a little seal, a little harbour seal really far up, next to the BBC building, right in the city centre of Glasgow. So it was amazing to like tick off a city centre location. I really wanted this book to feel as accessible as it could be, as well as having the big bucket list destinations. Because this body of water is great. So many people live and work in Glasgow.
Yeah.
And if you need that bit of blue health, you need that little bit of escapism, on your lunch break, go for a walk up and down the Clyde, paddleboard, and if you've got time.
Yeah, absolutely. We have the film archive at Kelvin Hall, the National Librarian. Yeah, I often think how amazing it is that there's the park as well at Kelvin Grove, and then also to have the river through the city is just so lovely, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know, it's really special, and it's amazing that you've taken advantage of it. Another question I just have to ask you, because I've been on one of these things, and my son's got one. How on earth do you stay up with that? No, but like it's really, and look, you're making it look really easy, but I know because I've been in, it's really, really hard.
Takes a bit of practice,
Yeah.
for sure. Takes a bit of practice, and also when the days when you really don't want to fall in, you don't fall in. So that was good.
Yeah. And the other amazing sort of city one is Edinburgh, of course.
Yeah.
A bit choppier perhaps than
Maybe a
Clyde.
little bit, yeah, on certain days we were there on a really beautiful day. Again, I think it was early morning, and these bridges are great. Like they're such an iconic part of Edinburgh, of Scotland.
Yeah.
You see them. You live in Fife, don't you?
Yeah, we were saying that earlier. So I live in Wormit in Fife, and the Tay Bridge is the road bridge is really close to me, and I've been out on the water there. And when you're under these bridges, you're struck by the magnificence of them, of the structure and how amazing it is. But yeah, I've never been near that one, and that's particularly amazing feat of engineering.
Yeah, it looks great from afar, but when you're like right under it, looking up at it, it's amazing. And again, so close to Edinburgh, so close to all of his communities around the Forth.
Yeah.
Super accessible. Maybe a little bit more challenging than other places in terms of the tide. So
Yes.
you have to know what you're doing with tide planning and weather planning. But if you get it all right, you can have an incredible journey.
Does it feel safe?
If you know what you're doing.
Well, it just feels like it's such a vast area there, and it's also there are cruise boats and other things going up and down in Edinburgh.
Sit quite close to the side is important. Going at slack tide, so when there's hardly any movement in the tidal system is also important. When there's no wind is very important for paddleboarding, because when you're paddleboarding, you're just a big sail. Any bit of wind can blow you. So choosing the right conditions, and when you get them, it can be safe for sure.
Yeah. It just looks really exciting, and also looks very easy, which again I would say it's not. And you do teach paddleboarding, don't you?
So these days I run an adventure company in East Lothian called Ocean Vertical, and we do all sorts of different adventures in the mountains, in the water, and teaching paddleboarding is part of it. So you need to come for a lesson.
Yeah. I
I
definitely do, actually. And then a complete contrast.
Yeah.
I just love the way in the book that you go to so many different places, and they're all really, really different. As well as Edinburgh and Glasgow, Aberdeen City Beach as well, and they've all got different facilities. But I loved this story about Loch Ann, or Loch Haven in particular, because you've got to park and then hike for quite a bit, haven't you, to get to the water? And it was really lovely the way you said you were seeing other pieces of water that you wanted to jump in, but you knew that you would just be soaking wet walking for miles. So you had to resist until you got the prize of this utterly stunning location.
Incredible. Has anyone here been to Loch Ann before? Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. It takes a while to get there, and I don't know what month, or maybe it was April or May, one of the early ones again. And there'd been like a really late season big dump of snow. So the quickest way to get there is to go up over the top of the plateau and then down again. But there'd been so much snow a few days before that we really didn't want to like turn our swim into like a full-scale mountaineering trip and have crampons and ice axes. So we took a much lower route, which was longer through the valleys, about 4 hours to get to the loch itself. Really freezing. The water was full of snow melt, obviously because all the snow from the hills had melted. It was melting, but an incredible swim. I can confess I was in there for about 5 minutes, maybe 6.
Yeah, I can't believe you actually can feel the cold. After being in Antarctica, I would have thought you'd be super resilient to the cold, but Scotland is still that cold
Especially when
that it's hard to swim in there.
Like Antarctica, it's really dry, cold, so you can cope with that, put loads of down clothes on. But when you're like in a wetsuit, it's definitely cold.
And so what kind of, I know this is a very sort of low-level question, but what kind of snacks do you have to take to keep your energy up for a 4-hour walk?
It's all about the snacks. Lots of Snickers. It's the same stuff you'd have in Antarctica.
Wow.
Lots of Snickers. And then I guess when you've been in the water, especially when you've then got to walk out for 4 hours, super important to warm your body up again.
Right.
So we had a little stove, and there's a great beach on Loch Anne. So after we got out of the water, we put the stove on, had a cup of really like hot tea and a bit of like hot food as well to warm ourselves back up again, and then hiked out.
So I suppose it's really important for people to know if they're thinking about doing something like that, you were super prepared. You know, you've got your wetsuit, your hat even, and your stove with you to make sure that you can, you don't get cold afterwards.
Like, a lot of the places are close and accessible, but some of them are pretty remote in Scotland, and you're far from people, especially when you're there in April or May. Not many people around, so being prepared is so important in terms of kit and looking after yourself, warming your body up, being fueled, which is great. It's all doable.
Yeah,
for sure.
Well, the pictures just say it all. It's like amazing to see the sort of the snow on the top of the mountain. And it was when you were swimming in that, in the piece, you say that you had to swim breaststroke because it was so cold. But then you actually got to see the beautiful sunlight and the mountains instead.
I tried to do front crawl for like the first few seconds, but it was so cold on my head, even with my high-vis bonnet on. So now just in breaststroke, but it was amazing, like looking up at the big mountains over you.
Yeah, it just feels so tempting when you see this to give it a try. And this is like one of my favourite stories altogether, when you went to St Kilda, and it was your birthday, wasn't it?
Yeah. So this was, it was one of the best places I've been in the whole world, St Kilda.
In the whole world?
In the whole world.
Right here in Scotland.
Yeah. It is the biggest chapter in the book. It's like, most of them are like 400 words, 500 words. This is like over 1,000 words of me rambling on about how much I love this place. And the publishers were like, should we cut this down a bit? And I was like, no, we're keeping it. Because it's so incredible. It's this archipelago. Is it maybe 90 kilometres off of the Outer Hebrides? So far off, right in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. It was inhabited for the past almost 5,000 years, on and off. Continuously inhabited for the last 2,000 years, all the way up until 1930, when the last people got taken off the island and replaced in different places in Scotland. Amazing human history, absolutely incredible.
And we have some of that in the library within our collections. Like, I think we have some in the film archive and also in photographs, like actual photographs of people who were on the island at the time.
I've got quite obsessed with it since getting back.
It's such an interesting story. Were there 60 of them left or something? And they voted?
Or even less. Yeah. It slowly was dwindling over the last few decades there. And then, 1930, the final people left. And you still see the village bay, and the streets are there, and people are remaking the bothies that they used to live in. Absolutely incredible. So the human history is amazing, but also the natural history of it is incredible. It was obviously a volcano that erupted however long ago, I said in the book, however millions of years ago. And it's home to an incredible amount of wildlife and bird life, seabirds. So in the height of breeding season, over 1 million different seabirds come to St Kilda, and they live on the highest cliffs in the UK, and they breed and they feed and they inhabit this place. So you see puffins, swarms of them. I didn't really know puffins could be in swarms, but when they're so many of them, like hundreds of thousands of them above your head, and they're almost like bees, the way they flap their wings so fast, and they're swarming above you. Incredible gannets coming and diving around you.
Was that intimidating?
It was amazing. Absolutely amazing. Scary that you're going to get pooed on at some point, but absolutely amazing.
But they didn't feel threatening at all. Like if they see a human in that environment and they're used to being...
Not the puffins, very mundane. They're skewers a little bit, so when you come up onto the cliffs, and they like to dive bomb you if you get too close. So they were a little bit scary. But
wow. And how did you get there? So it's quite tricky to get there, isn't it?
It's tricky. So we were unbelievably lucky on this day. It was my birthday. I actually didn't know we were going there, and Rachel and my girlfriend Tegan surprised me with this trip. And we were on Harris at the time, because we spent about 2 weeks in the Outer Hebrides doing all the locations there. And then on my birthday, they're like, let's meet here at like 6 in the morning on some strange port on the Isle of Harris. So we met everyone there, and then we got on a boat, and I think it was 2 or 3 hours on this very small boat, just like a 12-person boat, out into the middle of the Atlantic. As we were coming out of the boat, gannets were flying next to us. We saw porpoises, minke whales, this big black fin, like in the wake of the boat that we don't really know what it was, maybe a basking shark. And then you come and you see St Kilda just like emerges on the horizon. The sun was shining, as it was in everywhere we went in the book, but especially this day.
Scotland.
Yeah. And it was amazing. We had a day on the island to explore. There's other small islands there as well. This main one is called Herta, and then small islands that we went on a boat tour around, saw all the birds. Just incredible. I'm probably not explaining that well, but if you read the chapter, I spent more time on writing the chapter.
Oh yeah, I could really see that. You know, you really loved it, and just that you got into the sense of history and the human story of the island itself, and it seemed really magical, but also incredibly beautiful water.
So we had to add something in to make it a blue space book for Blue Scotland. So we had to swim or paddleboard. Obviously we couldn't really take our paddleboards or kayaks, so in the end we just got in Village Bay and went for a nice swim at the end, and that meant I could get it through the publishers and have it in the book.
It's absolutely stunning, really amazing. I just can't recommend it highly enough, actually, for just even a coffee table book of amazing pictures, even if you don't intend to actually go paddleboarding and you just want to use it to walk around these areas. I think what you've done is really explored some of our hidden secrets, really, in Scotland, some really beautiful, amazing places.
It was an incredible journey. Super lucky that we got to spend that amount of time in Scotland, really getting to know it. Like, as I said, I've lived here for 8 years before we started that journey. Travelled a lot, been in different places, but never really as extensively as I did when I started exploring this. Getting into the North Coast was amazing. In so many amazing communities up there that are doing great things for Scotland in terms of looking after the environment around us. Really incredible journey, and great to see it all together with Rachel's incredible photos.
Oh, it's beautiful. And you will be signing books later on, and there's a chance to purchase as well. But now it's over to all of you. I'm sure people have lots of questions for Mollie, any sort of burning things to ask.
If you reach just for a moment.
Why blue Scotland when it could have been blue-green or perhaps even grey?
Never grey.
Not grey.
I think the blue, I wanted to link it to the concept of blue health. And it looks good, doesn't it? Blue.
Yeah,
I think green
absolutely.
would probably pull you more into forests and countryside. And it wasn't always blue, but when it was incredible. Like the front cover, for example, was in Arisaig, and we were on like a 3-day sea kayaking trip, and the water was literally as clear as it looks in this photo. It felt like the Caribbean. It was absolutely incredible.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Just what's next? No pressure.
Good question.
So I think when I got back from Antarctica, and obviously coming into lockdown and everything, I feel much more kind of maybe settled. I don't know why. I guess I turned 30 in that time as well. And I feel, so I don't have any big expeditions on the cards, or even in my head at the moment. Not saying there won't be any, but there might be. So at the moment, focusing on my business in East Lothian, trying to get more and more people out into these kind of spaces. I've just signed, not sure if I'm allowed to mention it or not, but I will, to write a book, more of a book about my expeditions. So it'll be kind of the psychology behind spending 58 days alone in Antarctica, and the fear that I felt on Everest, crossing those crevasses, and talking to other adventurers about the kind of psychological aspects of their trip as well. So about to start writing that. I've got 11 months to get that done. So that'll be the next focus. So lots of time inside writing.
I think that would be fascinating. I think that, for me, that's really, an interesting thing about speaking to you is just how do you manage to get your head around being out there on your own all that time. So I think that will be really interesting to read.
All of the trips are like 75 to 80% psychological.
Yeah.
Like a lot of it's physical. You've got to pull a sled, you've got to climb a big mountain, but it all comes down to your mindset and how resilient you can be and how you can just keep going, I guess.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Amazing. Any more questions? Yes.
Do you have any intention? Kenny's coming in like.
Do you have any intention of going to climb K2?
Yeah, good question. My mum might be watching this, so not really at the moment. I think maybe when I was younger, I might have thought about it more. I mean, I'll never say never, even though I know my mum's watching. It's a very different kind of mountain. It's much more technical. It's much more objective danger around you. There's a few sections where the avalanche risk is super high, so you're taking on a bit more personal risk yourself. It's getting a bit busier these days, so more and more people are climbing it. I really hope it will never happen, like become Everest, but it is getting busier, which when you put a lot of people in places where there is a lot of objective danger around you, that's a bit more terrifying. I think if I could know that I would be there just with my team, maybe that would be a different game. So not at the moment, for sure.
When you mention your mum there, does she find it scary when you're going off on adventures like that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one of the hardest bits is, like, everything I do on these big expeditions, it is kind of quite selfish, and I'm very aware of that. Like, I'm the only one that gets to see the sunrises and the sunsets over the Himalayas and really experience these environments. And everyone at home is just kind of here, worrying, like very proud, very like will celebrate afterwards, but there is the worry that's on them. So yeah, it's hard, but always super supportive. Yeah, both my parents.
Just a question about your journey to Everest and I guess the impact, the environmental impact, the amount of people that are now climbing Everest on either side, but mostly I think the south side. What do you think might happen to that scenario? Because it's not just human lives that are in danger, it's, the locals' lives, it's the environmental impact, the waste, the gas canisters.
I think there's a lot of press about it, especially in the last few years, and the press doesn't necessarily quite reflect what's going on the mountain. People love a story that is very negative about Everest, if it's about dead bodies, if it's about piles of rubbish, if it's about climbers being unresponsible. There's tons of that coming in, so I try not to let that affect my judgment of it. When I was there, there are people on the mountain for 8 weeks of the year, every year, and lots of people, especially on the south side of the mountain. On the south side of the mountain, they're right at the head of the Khumbu Glacier. The Khumbu Glacier feeds into a lot of Nepal, a lot of the drinking water. They've just recently, last season, moved it off of the glacier, which is a great step. So it means people aren't living on the glacier and going to the toilet or whatever on the glacier, coming down in however many years' time and turning into drinking water. So that's a great step. The busyness on the mountain and the kind of associated rubbish, people are making steps on that, absolutely. The busyness is still interesting. I think you basically have to get a permit from the Nepalese government to climb that side of the mountain. So if they cut down the amount of permits, less people would go there and it would be safer and there would be less impact. But they make a lot of money out of it, and it's a big industry, and it's giving a lot of people work in that area in the Khumbu. So yeah, it's hard. And I definitely don't have the answer, but it's definitely one of the things that you think about when you're there, absolutely.
And you make that point about Scotland too, don't you? In fact, that's your sort of parting words in the book, is that people should be respectful of the environment and try not to leave things.
Yeah, for sure. And I guess that was always on my mind when writing a guidebook to Scotland, and especially most of them aren't hidden secret places. There's maybe a few that might be. But as Scotland opens up a little bit more, especially in the north, in the small communities with things like the North Coast 500, it is interesting to see the impact. Some places are doing it great, and some places are still kind of coming to terms with it. The places that I felt were working really well were the places where the community was leading everything. So a few great community areas such as Hooshanis on Harris, where they put a lot of effort into building this amazing place right off the beach it looks great within the environment. It's got toilets, it's got showers, it's got parking, it's got waste disposal, but in a really sympathetic way with the environment. It's also got this great room that looks out over the beach, and in there's notice boards about the wildlife, about the fauna and flora, teaching people about the environment that they're in, and that was all community funded to get that going. And it's an incredible example of what can happen to teach people to respect Scotland. And lots of other small things up on the north coast, the community come together to get even like a toilet block on a beach that's getting more and more popular. It is so important to get bins there in these really remote places. So it's happening, and I think, community-led stuff has to be the way to do it.
Great. I think we have a question online.
Yes, an online question. When mountaineering and paddling, do the different landscapes bring you different feelings?
What a good question. And I guess deep down, maybe not. Maybe it's all the same. And it's that feeling of feeling really small and feeling a little bit insignificant and realising how big the world is and how important the world is and how non-important I am, which is actually a really good, humbling way to be, I think. The world is so much bigger than us, so much more important than us. And you feel that when you're paddleboarding around Fidger Island in North Berwick, or if you're alone in the middle of Antarctica. I think it's deep down a similar feeling. Just, I guess, respect and feeling humbled. Even on the Clyde.
Great. Well, it just remains for me to say huge thanks to you, Mollie, for coming along. It's absolutely fascinating, and I feel like I'm even more in awe of you and what you've done, and it's absolutely incredible. And thanks to all of you for coming along and your questions. Thanks to everyone online. The copies of the book tonight are on sale outside, and Mollie is able to sign them. And we're getting a special discount, so it's how much, Kenny?
17 instead of 20.
That's great. So £17 instead of 20. So I just ask you all to just thank Mollie for coming along and speaking to us today.
Thank you very much.